Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ashley Leonard, the Associate Director of the To&Through Middle Grades Network, and we are absolutely thrilled to have all of you here with us on this beautiful Thursday here in Chicago. Who knew we would get 70 degrees in November? For our practice spotlight about how to make work more meaningful with Brighton Park and Columbia Explorers. Before I turn it over to our speakers today, I want to highlight two events that our team at To&Through will be putting on before the end of the calendar year, so that you can join us for another couple of sessions like this in the next few weeks. First, on December 1st, at noon, we'll be having a conversation with Jackie Lemon and Rito Martinez about how to center equity in organizational change. Both Rito and Jackie have a long history of kind of leading in this space, so we're really excited about this conversation and hope you will join us to learn more from them. Then, a little less than a week later, our very own director, Alex Seeskin, will share the case and make the case for why Chicago's selective high schools and colleges should actually be less selective. So I know there's a lot of controversy around this topic, and Alex has been really thoughtful about this. So also think this is going to be a great conversation since we're just in that season right now here in Chicago when students are making those selections. So we hope that you will join us for those discussions. Information on how to register has also been dropped in the chat. A couple quick reminders as well before we jump into our conversation today. First, this is a webinar format, so we do not have the chat function available, but if you have questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to some of those questions at the end of the presentation. And then second, one of the things we've started doing following these sessions is offering an optional space to discuss what you've heard today. We got this feedback from folks as we've done these webinars throughout the pandemic and are starting to transition out, that it's really valuable to just kind of process and learn from one another after our presenters. So we hope that you'll join us for that. We will drop information for a separate Zoom for that conversation at the end of our presentation today. But if you registered, you are also already sent that calendar invite. So more info as we kind of get through the presentation today. So with that, I am going to share my screen, all of the transparent facilitation in this world today, and get us started. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, the To&Through Project strives to create equitable education outcomes for Chicago public school students. And we do this by helping educators use data and inquiry for action. One way we empower practitioners and policymakers to do this work is by creating tools and resources to support the daily work of educators. And 3 years ago, we took this to the next level by launching the To&Through Middle Grades Network. And this was designed to more directly support middle grades educators in using our research and tools to really support shifts in their practice. As you can see here, part of what our work in the Middle Grades Network focuses on is how can we increase the number of students that are on track, which we at To&Through just define as attendance at or above 90%, and a GPA at or above 3.0 through a meaningful increase in students' sense of belonging. We currently work with 14 schools, which you see here on the map, and 2 of them are who you'll hear from today. In order to accomplish this aim of increasing the number of students on track, we provide team support through coaching, professional development, and we really help practitioners think about how do they create environments where middle schoolers can really thrive and really become their best selves as they begin that transition to high school, post-secondary, and beyond. We do this and spend a lot of time focusing on our work with schools and how can they collect data, both quantitative and qualitative, to determine a change idea, or another way of saying it is a shift in their practice that they want to test out that they think will improve those experiences and outcomes for their students. Today, you'll hear from Cecilia Mendoza, who's the assistant principal at Brighton Park Elementary School, Enrica Martinez, who is the English language program teacher at Columbia Explorers Academy, about the change ideas that they tested during the 2021-22 school year to make work more meaningful for their middle school students. I'm going to start by introducing Cecilia, and then after she gives her presentation, I'll come back on to introduce Rika. So to start, Cecilia Mendoza, or Ceci, as we like to call her, was born and raised on the south side of Chicago and is a product of CPS. She is married and has a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son who also attends CPS. Ceci started out as a bilingual middle school science teacher and pursued a master's degree with endorsements in special education, bilingual education, and English as a second language. During her time as a special education teacher, she became more involved in her school and began leading different clubs. This really piqued her interest in leadership. Growing up, Ceci didn't have many Latina teachers, nor did she really see anyone who looked like her in administration. She really believes deeply that representation is important and that students should see leaders in schools who look like them and have similar cultural backgrounds. As a result of this belief and her own experiences, she decided to go back to school and received another master's in educational leadership and is now serving as her first year of assistant principal at Brighton Park. She is so excited to start this new journey, and we are equally excited to have Ceci share a little bit of the great work that she is leading at Brighton Park today. So I will now turn it over to Ceci to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So right now I work at Brighton Park Elementary School. It's located in the Brighton Park area of the southwest side of Chicago. We are a very small school, but we service students in pre-K all the way up to 8th grade. And we have a lot of our demographics here, but I really like to focus in that our school is small, so it allows us to get to know the students a lot more and build those relationships a lot deeper with them. We do have a large Latinx population at Brighton Park Elementary, and a lot of our students are English language learners. Through our start with Brighton Park, we created a definition of student success, and we created that with the help of students, staff, and parents. We feel like in order for students to be successful, they need to know what it means to be successful, and parents also need to know what it means. So together, we came up with this definition of student success. So students at Brighton Park are successful when they are organized and responsible, able to be self-aware and self-regulate, when they are comfortable self-advocating, when they are able to act as leaders, they're problem solvers and critical thinkers, and able to show mastery of the content. So our first change idea was using specific language about the why behind each lesson. When students are able to know why they're doing something or why they're learning what they're learning, we feel like they will show more mastery. Not only why they're learning it, but what is it that they need to achieve to master that lesson. So we started with a form of active monitoring. It's often known as aggressive monitoring, but we kind of changed that up to fit our needs, the needs of our students and our teachers. So really looking at what a standard is saying that students need to master, then coming up with a specific learning target with relevancy. So why are students learning this? And then looking for what we call as look-fors, and but what is it that the student really needs to know in order to master the standard? So we went in, we started looking at the standards, the learning targets, but then also giving students that specific feedback. So if they put a check on the paper, that means that they got it, or if not, it's immediate feedback if they're on track in the class. But more specifically, being able to connect the learning target and the standard to the larger picture. So clearly telling students at the beginning of class, this is what we're going to learn today, and this is why you're going to learn it today. So we chose meaningful work as our change idea because through the Elevate data, we noticed that students were not necessarily understanding why the work they were doing was meaningful. Even though students are able to identify the work that they're doing might be interesting, it's not really meaningful to them, and they don't understand the connection between the classwork and their real life. So as a school, we decided that this was an area that we can not only fit what we're currently doing, but it's also going to have some big impacts in the long run. We didn't want to just do something that was going to be, right out of the ordinary. We wanted to do something that fit with our school mission and our priorities for the school. So here we were able to see that in the class, students, they weren't really sure if they were getting that in the class we do meaningful work, not busy work. Only about 55% of all students thought that. So we wanted to see an increase. And then with the feedback, we saw that 68% of students were able to understand that they were receiving specific suggestions about how to improve their work. So then we're like, okay, well, we are going to be doing active monitoring, but how is it that we're really going to benefit the students and the teachers? So it's streamlined. So we decided to look at standards-based grading scale and look at skills progress. And we saw that some of the benefits of active monitoring were that students got immediate feedback. It was based on a specific skill. And then we were able to group students based on that skill. We realized that with the inconsistent attendance based off COVID, we were able to see which students were receiving and learning the skills. And if they were absent, well, we had that data to track to see who we still needed to target. And we saw that 77% of students found the work interesting, but only 55% found it meaningful. So that for us was a big gap that we wanted to fill. So then as the years progressed, we saw that, yes, active monitoring, teachers are going to be able to active monitor, provide that work, but we decided to use a choice board with different strategies that teachers can use to be able to connect that classwork to life outside of school. And we saw that through our data. We were noticing that we were not making the gains that we wanted. We saw in February that even though we've been focusing on meaningful work, our second Elevate data showed us that students were not seeing the connections. So we needed to be more specific. How can we clearly show them or demonstrate that the work that they're doing in class is relevant to their lives? Was the learning target not sufficient? So that kind of brought us to our choice boards that teachers had the choice to make it very evident of how they were going to be able to connect it to their lives. And then later we did see that in April, we were able to get that data up. So we were able to see that from the beginning of the school year, 58% of students didn't see the work they were doing was meaningful. So 61%, it's slow growth, but we got some progress to show that the work, what they were doing is meaningful. We're gonna kind of go to the next one. As a school, we believe strongly in looking at students, surveys, and student voice to be able to take action in our work. So not only do we look at the Elevate survey results, we also do a survey called the Washoe County School District Social Emotional Competency Assessment, which measures students' emotional skills as they see them. And then the Elevate survey measures the student perceptions on classroom learning conditions. So as a school, we give both surveys and it's a lot of data. So really looking at how we're going to compile this information to make it digestible for teachers to then be able to do something about it. Like we have the student voice, but now what? What is the next steps that we're going to do? So we look at celebrations, there's a ton, and then really focusing on 2 areas of growth per survey. So then we're like, okay, these are just kind of numbers. These are just percentages that students say that they agree or disagree on. So we wanted to know a little bit more. We wanted to know what do they think? So what is that qualitative evidence that students can actually tell us? Like, what makes work interesting? You're telling us that it's not interesting, but what makes it interesting? So then we gave them a survey based off of the SICA survey and Elevate with the questions that we really wanted to know. So this is just one quote from a student. What my teacher could do to make learning more interesting is to let us have more discussions about what we are reading and not just make us answer a lot of comprehension questions to see if we understand what we read. As a student, we need to be able to socialize. We need to be allowed to socialize more to be able to learn. So coming out of a pandemic, this really struck home for us because it's like we had to teach students again how to have those discussions. Not only are we allowing them to have the discussions in the class, giving them that space, but how are we supporting them in that? And then this is an example of choice words. So how can we make work more meaningful and that students can really understand how to make that work meaningful? Whether it's students coming up with what did they learn in class and how was it meaningful to life with a study hall activity, having them answer an exit slip about the specific skill that they learned and how they can use it in real life, having a learning target with it being very specific, saying we are learning this so we can because, or having an in-class activity and discussion in class for students. So teachers got the 4 examples of what they can do. And then as a grade level team, in grade level teams, we came back together to discuss the answers students were giving and how it was going, just to see if they were showing that they understood the relevance of the content. And at the end, we realized that if we focus on meaningful work, students were invited to think about how the work was connected to their lives and how they can use it later on. By giving students feedback, they have been able to show mastery of the contents and think critically about how to improve. And I think some of our biggest learnings are that we can't assume what students are thinking or how they feel. We need to ask them directly and try different ways to build their academic mindset. Coming out of the pandemic and still kind of going through, through COVID, we know that students have lost some of that instructional time with their peers. So how can we make that, how can we fill in those gaps? And then last but not least, understanding that the student's experience is fundamental in having students feel like they belong to the school and they feel those connections to their classmates and teachers.
Thank you so much, Ceci, for sharing your experiences and all your learnings from Brighton Park about how you guys made work more meaningful for your students last year. Just a reminder before I transition over to Rika to please add any questions you have to the Q&A. We will have time for a full Q&A following Rika's presentation. So now I would like to introduce Rika Martinez. Rika was also born and raised in Chicago and attended CPS for elementary school. Throughout her 12-year career, all of which has been at Columbia Explorers Academy, she taught 4th grade as well as 6th and 7th grade ELA. In her current role as an English language program teacher, Rika helps organize curriculum, testing, and provides professional development and coaching to teachers who support the 353 English learners in the bilingual program at Columbia Explorers. In addition, Rika leads the MGN team and the yearbook committee, while also serving on the instructional leadership team, the behavioral health team, and her network student planning team. Outside of work, she spends as much time as possible with her almost 2-year-old daughter and loves being a mom. So it is, again, my pleasure to introduce Rika Martinez to talk a little bit about her experiences at Columbia Explorers and how they have made work more meaningful for their students there.
Hello, thank you, Ashley. Like Ashley said, I am Rika Martinez from Columbia Explorers Academy. Just a brief overview about our school. We have 792 students here, and about half of those students are EL learners. We are located in Brighton Park, like Ceci School in Brighton Park. And we have a fairly large school. We have 4 buildings, a lot happening. So the MGM team has been great in helping our upper grades, but we also like to streamline and do things whole school. So a lot of the work that I'll be talking about today, we have done from our younger grades and modified it for whole school. So our definition of student success is here. I won't read through all of the bullet points, but just an overall summary is we like to focus and make sure that our students are successful when they have a positive and supportive environment and develop those healthy relationships between their own peers and educators. So this in turn will have a positive impact on the whole child. So that's really what we strive for here at Columbia. Go to the next slide. So similar to Brighton Park and what Ceci just overviewed, we also focused on meaningful work, and our change idea based on our data from last year was to use strategies to help build those meaningful work connections. So what we have started to do at Columbia is we began a cycle, and we tend to give our students a lot of surveys. And what we noticed is we wanted to provide feedback to the students based on what they were saying in those surveys. So we found that to be extremely helpful in not only just saying, okay, we hear what you're saying, but now what? So we began this with our Elevate data. We gave the survey to our 5th through 8th graders. After that, our step 2, we facilitated talking circles based on the results. And we have a PowerPoint that all teachers follow and copy, and they put in their own survey results based on their student data. And this is done through advisory, which we have every Wednesday morning from 8 to 9. The entire school does advisory, and that's a time where we have these talking circles, where we do grade reflections, where we talk about social emotional learning. So not so much focus on academic, but it is a time to develop those peer and educator relationships. So based on our talking circle, we then gather some student reflections via another Google form, a survey that they take after we discuss the feedback. And then teachers take what the students say, and then we implement strategies based on those students' reflections. And like I stated earlier, we do this school-wide. The 5th through 8th graders do the Elevate survey, whereas PK through 4th grade take those questions from the Elevate and they modify them to make them more appropriate for their grade level. But they follow the same sort of cycle. So last year, based on the results, this was our first Elevate survey results. And you can see here 62% for the learning condition of meaningful work was our lowest. So that's where we wanted to focus. Of course, we highlighted the affirming identities and all of that, but that's where we wanted to focus. So our talking circle was the next step. And these are just some of the samples that are part of the PowerPoint that we provide. And we want to make sure that we let the students know that what they're saying makes a difference. And that's the biggest point. And we would hope to improve our own practice to make sure that those students see that we're taking what they're saying and we see it as critical information for us. So this is just an example here of a question. And I believe it's kind of hard to see, but the question is asking like that the teacher makes what we're learning really interesting. And so we would share, and a question that we would ask the class is, what have you found interesting about this class? And so then we would have a talking circle about it. And that way students would also get to hear what other students thought and responded to that particular question. And the teachers have the autonomy to choose whatever questions they want based on their own results. So each talking circle is not really focused on the same questions per se, but on the same subject. You can go to the next one. Thank you. So our step 3 was then to take the student reflections. So at the end of the talking circle, after everybody's shared and we've kind of had a discussion about it, we do a Google form, another survey. And one of the biggest questions was, what does meaningful work mean to you? And so you can see here are some of the responses. They can compare it to real life. It's something that they enjoy doing, or they put real effort into it, something that they can do long-term, not just in school, and it will help you later on in life, and you do it for yourself. And then here are more reflections. So what makes work meaningful? These are the different types of meaningful work strategies that we have in class. And so students were able to select as many as possible that it would help them make more connections to the real world. So when they do partner work or assignments that have characters in it that they can relate to, or books or project-based assignments, student choice is really what we were aiming for in this question. We can go on. And so based off of the reflections, we met as an MGM team, and we have representation from each grade level, as well as we had counselors and our case manager part of that team. And we developed this similar to what Brighton Park did with their choice board. This was just a little bit mainly for the teachers. So we developed these strategies here. And we didn't want to make it more work for the teachers. What we wanted to do was take what we already were doing and just make that more intentional and explicit when we're teaching our lessons, and making those teaching points more, not obvious, but more connected to the students' real life. So for example, in our unit plans, we have our essential questions and our enduring understandings, and those are directly connected to student lives and what they can see. They're like debatable questions that they can use outside of school. So instead of, creating new strategies, using those questions or enduring understandings in your lessons and bringing it back to those specific things that they're already teaching from their unit was one idea. We said an exit slip could have been another. Make a students seeing character connections to their real lives, and just making those more intentional throughout the lesson. And it could have been a quick, okay, how can we use this outside of this classroom? Just to get the students thinking. So what we did is we implemented these strategies for the whole month of March, and then wanted to take the Elevate survey again in April to see what the results would be. And the next, and we also developed a co-created definition of meaningful work. So our definition we took from multiple student surveys, and we came up with meaningful work is work that helps us make connections to the real world and our own lives. Meaningful work is work that excites us and motivates us now and to grow in the future. And you can see here that this was our last step for the end of the year data. And meaningful work went from 62% to 69%. And then we had some other growth areas, because focusing on that meaningful work and making those connections helped to also raise some of our other learning conditions. So community, classroom community went from 68 to 73. Student voice went from 68 to 73, and then even teacher caring went up from 72 to 75. So we did see growth across the board, and affirming identity stayed the same, which we focus a lot of on identity work as well throughout our units. We'll go to the next one. So then we discussed with teachers at grade levels what strategies they used. We did this through our grade level meetings, and a lot of teachers talked about, just making things more intentional in their instruction, reviewing, adding reflection pieces to some of their assignments, putting more exit slips into their assignments, and then just periodically asking questions about where could this fit in for, a math lesson, for example. How can we tie this when you go to the grocery store, or things like that. And the teachers really saw the students making better connections to their real lives and making more meaning in their work. So these are just some examples of the 5th through 8th grade. And even, like I said, we did streamline in 2nd grade. They were making real world connections across all contents, and they could see how like telling time in math class connected to other pieces of their unit plan. And then if we continue, there's more teacher reflections here, like what successes have you had with this strategy? And a lot of teachers talked about how not only making these connections to their lives, it really helped with their student voice, and there was better engagement in class, and students were able just to make deeper connections to the content, and they really saw the importance of the work. And so with that, like I said, the impact and lessons learned is that there's deeper connections. Students saw the importance of their work. They were using their voices, and I think they felt that they could trust, that we trust what their opinions are, and they were using their voices more in class. It builds better, stronger connections. And what teachers really wanted students to know and continue with this work is we want to provide that collaboration between the students and the teachers and make the students aware that they are stakeholders in their education and this process. So that's really important. And that's why we're continuing this cycle this year as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tarika, for sharing the work being done at Columbia Explorers, and to Ceci for sharing the work being done at Brighton Park. I am Jennifer Choke, and I am the Middle Grades Network coach that has been supporting both Brighton Park and Columbia Explorers for the last 3 years. I've so appreciated the work being done and the way that they bring both students and educators into the process. And then really thinking about how to make those voices heard. I'm going to ask Rika and Ceci to join us on camera. We're going to move into some Q&A here. We've gotten some questions in the chat, and if you have more, please feel free to ask them. And thank you for stopping to share screen there so that we can see everyone. So we are going to start, I think, with a question actually, Ceci, that was put into chat, and I know you sort of answered, or you've answered already, but would love to hear an example of what is active monitoring. And then from there, what have you continued doing in that active monitoring lens? And what progress has been made since you started working on that initiative?
Thank you. Yeah, so active monitoring is more commonly referred to as aggressive monitoring. And it's a strategy by Bambrick. We just didn't call it active aggressive monitoring. We felt like it was too much for our school. It didn't really fit with who we are as leaders. But what it is, it's just a strategy that teachers can use to give like the immediate feedback in the classroom, so that students know exactly where they're at and being able to meet that skill or standard that they are being taught in the class. So pretty much like in our science class, I was a science teacher, so I think back to that a lot, and I used it a lot in science, is like if I was teaching, sorry, I'm just like trying to go back and think about it.
No worries.
An easier one, because all I'm thinking about the times I used it in science with air pressure and things like that. But let's, if we do it, I'm going to start in a math class. If I am teaching how to add, what are the skills that a student needs to be able to add 2-digit numbers in the class? So first you would say, all right, class, I'm going to go around and I'm going to look to see if you were able to put your numbers vertically on a piece of paper. And you would just kind of go around quickly with a notepad and with a marker, and you would just check to see if every student was able to do that as they're working. As you are looking, you're also giving that student that immediate feedback. And it could be through a star. It could be through a form, like a consistent form of feedback that the students know what it means. So every student knows that a check means that they're on the right path, or a dot means that they need to go back and look at something. So that way they're not working for the whole class time, and they know that, okay, I need to pause and I need to go back before we're at the end of the class and we're like, oh no, you didn't get any of it. So it's really trying to give students that feedback in the moment so that they know before we're at the end.
Yeah, and I assume some of this also helps with like differentiation for the teacher, right? So that then if they see that there's a lot of dots as they walk through, then they know that that's something they may have to go back and reteach versus something where there's a lot of stars.
Yeah, and we like to call them like rounds. So like if there's 3 things that students need to be able to do before the end of the lesson to master that particular skill, you would want to do like 2 or 3 rounds depending on the lesson. And once you finish that first round, if there's half of the class not learning it, okay, can we do a small reteach? Can we regroup students based off of what skills they aren't learning yet or they haven't been able to master? So it's definitely like a form of differentiation and being just reflective in the learning and responsive in the moment.
Yeah, and I know for that second half of the question of like, has this continued, that there are teachers that are continuing to do this year, and it's something that you all are continuing to work on at Brighton Park.
Yeah, this is a skill that at first, when we think about strategies to use in the classroom and you're like, all right, we need to give feedback to all the students at least 3 times in one class period. It sounds like it's a lot, right? It sounds aggressive, like it's going to be too much. But once they receive that coaching and they were able to practice it in the classroom, now when we do a lot of learning walks at least once a quarter, we're seeing teachers implement active monitoring with students, and they're saying that it's a lot easier. They know where students are at and where students need that support.
Great, thank you so much. Rika, I think for you, the second question in the chat was around, did students create any of these solutions or change ideas? And I know Columbia Explorers has been really intentional about gathering student voice within these change ideas. Can you speak a little bit to how you've incorporated that student voice into your change ideas?
Yes, so before we do Elevate, we do a getting to know you survey at the beginning of the school year. We typically try to give it within the first week or 2. And based on what the students say, there's a plethora of questions, but we kind of structure the questions to be around building those peer-to-peer or peer-to-educator relationships. So based on those student responses, we also do a similar cycle and we provide the feedback. And from there is when we develop our change ideas. So that's how we incorporate student voice into these change ideas, because we often hear students say, we ask questions about like what motivates you, or at home, who helped you with homework, or what is something that your teacher did last year that you really enjoyed, or that you learned about that you really enjoyed, things like that. And so we kind of take those questions to structure these change ideas. So that's how we incorporate student voice at the beginning of the year to help us with this. But we also, throughout our units, offer student voice and choice with a lot of the assignments that they're doing and projects and things of that sort.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I remember from last year was like there was a question around heroes, and like seeing the commonalities across students and like who are their heroes, and having that conversation was really powerful with the different classes in some of those circles. I think the other piece around that student voice, I think, was even within how teachers ended up like trying to get to meaningful work, right? Like those things came from students, right? They said, I want to work more in groups. Right. And so there were teachers that kind of went in and said, like, we're going to do group work once a week or whatever it may be.
Yes. And even like, I know that one of the questions we asked is about like public speaking or like sharing with the class, and a lot of students, that's a fear for them. It's a fear for many. And so we, like you said, we developed different ways or different options for them to choose to do that type of speaking. So, and we pointed that out to the students. We're like, we know that you're not confident. You told us on your survey, that's fine. We're going to give you different options. And I think they started to see that connection, like, oh, they're listening to what we're saying. And so that, kind of empowered them a little bit.
Yeah. Ceci, is there anything you'd want to add on the incorporating student voice into those change ideas?
A lot of what we did was, getting those primary surveys and just like looking at the numbers and then thinking about what are the extra things that we want to know more about, and not just in percentages. So we did a lot of student interviews, like empathy interviews, and those were really helpful in getting to know what a handful of students. We didn't do those with every group, but a handful of students what they thought, and being able to implement that as well was helpful.
Yeah. And I think that looking at all those different surveys and kind of putting them next to each other is something that's been really successful at both of your schools. So thank you for sharing those. As we know, there's a district-wide shift now to use this type of data, right? This district is moving to everybody taking a survey called Cultivate, and Cultivate and Elevate are kind of sister surveys. And so student surveys are likely on lots of people's minds, probably some of which are on this call right now. What's the value you've seen in using data like Elevate? Either one of you can start.
I can start. I really feel more connected to the students based on what they're saying. And they are really, there's a part of Elevate is they can share responses to the questions too. So seeing what the students are writing based on the questions, that was very enlightening for a lot of teachers. And we've seen these relationships, peer-to-peer and teacher-educator, just grow, and it just makes a more positive and supportive learning environment. I think overall, especially post-pandemic, these last 2 years have been very hard for teachers coming back and just getting students reacclimated to everything. And so these talking circles and the data really help to foster those conversations and really help guide instruction based on what the students honestly need. Like we have these, standardized tests and those types of data, but it's really if the student is not, mentally prepared and having those, positive relationships, then that's going to trickle down into their academics. So I really, really enjoy and I find it so beneficial, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, just for those of you that aren't familiar with Elevate, is it's very personalized to that teacher's classroom. And so I think one of the things that Rika was talking about is like she can see specific students and kind of what they wrote, but she actually doesn't know which student it is, because that is all anonymized so that you only see your class and the percentages, and then we can see a full school too. But teachers do get to look specifically at their class. Ceci, what value do you see with using a survey like Elevate, especially now in your new role as assistant principal?
I think it's very much like what Rika says. One thing that, has stuck through with me is we can't assume, right? There's never, we see students, they might be in the class, they might seem happy, they have this persona, but we can never just assume that what we are doing is good enough for everyone. Everyone has this different perception of how they feel. And every year with every student, every teacher has to kind of manage it differently. We're never going to get the same group of students, and in the class there's 20 to 30 students. We have to work with what's in front of us, and we can't do that unless we are hearing from them. So I think one of the biggest shifts for me was being able to see that data myself, giving that data and then getting back those class results where it's like, oh, how did I miss that all the boys feel like this? Or how do I miss that all the girls are feeling this certain way, where they're not seeing that I do care about them? So that's, I think, been the biggest shift, and being able to see now as, in the principal role, seeing that teachers are also feeling this, like, how did we just miss this? Like we thought it was fine. So I think it's really important to be able to see that student perception, to hear from them, and then not only being able to hear from them, but what is that we're going to do to make those changes.
Yeah. I think that brought up an interesting question from my end, is thinking about like how to prep staff to be able to look at that kind of data, right? And be able to because that's hard, right? It's hard to get that data, and to your point, oh my gosh, I missed that, right? I missed that, my students feel whatever it is. What do you think is important to be able to help prep staff? And neither one of you can answer that because I know, Rika, you've been leading this work, and Ceci, so have you at your school. So what is the important piece to kind of share with staff as they start to look at this data for the first time?
Yes, I can speak to that. Getting that teacher buy-in, right? And it was tough. It's been tough. We're still dealing with, there's a purpose we do advisory and there's a reason why. And I think once we started Elevate and teachers were able to see their own data and they were like, oh, like Ceci was saying, like, how did we miss this? And they were able to change their curriculum, change the lessons they were doing. And so I think Elevate is really what sold teachers on that. But just stressing the importance of that. If the students want to be here, they're motivated to be here, they're building those relationships, and you'll see that trickle down into their academics. I think that is the biggest stressor that we keep pushing every single year. And routine also is another piece of getting that teacher buy-in. If we're continuing to do Elevate, then a feedback talking circle, then reflection, and then implementation, and just continue that structure. Teachers are used to it. We provide the slides for them. All they have to do is plug and chug their data. So like I said, I don't want to give teachers more work. We have a lot on our plates. There's a lot going on. But I think seeing the importance of that and then just keeping the structure the same, that gets the teachers to really understand the importance of the work.
Yeah. Ceci, anything on your end that you want to add to kind of that piece around staff buy-in?
No, I think it's just, really emphasizing that just because you care, or just because you're doing the best that you can, that students might not receive it, or they might just need a different way of knowing it. Some students might need to, you just need to tell them. Some students you need to show them. So learning the students that are in front of you every year is going to be essential. And then just knowing we all think differently as staff. So going back to that, it's not us exactly, it's just meeting our students where they're at. I think it's definitely key.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've seen at both of your schools is this idea of this is how the students are perceiving it. We know you care, you care deeply. That's why you're in these conversations with your students, and they're not perceiving it like that right now. And so this is an actual conversation we have, and something that is within your locus of control, which I think as educators is sometimes so hard to get, is so much seems out of your kind of control at this moment. And so having something that you feel like you can impact change, and it will really change students' experiences, I think is something I've seen on both of your teams. So, and I've appreciated. So we only have a few minutes left, and I would love to hear kind of where you are now, right? This was all information from last year, and you've kind of both jumped into this year, and would love to hear kind of where are you now with your work on student experience surveys and meaningful work, and what do you think is coming up next? Ceci, let's start with you.
So I think one of the biggest gains last year that we learned was some of those school visits. So we learned so much from Rika and her school and the work that they're doing. So something that we are doing a little bit more is, still building that teacher buy-in, but them really believing that they can make this work happen. And, so one thing that we're doing is very similar to Rika, is having those talking circles in the class and figuring out what it is that the students are saying about the data that they're going to see. So that's kind of the road that we're taking this year.
Yeah. Rika?
Just a disclaimer, the announcements might go on, so if I mute, that's why. But similar to what Ceci was saying, we are continuing the work. We're actually right now, I just had grade level meetings this week, and teachers are doing their first round of feedback talking circles. So I'm excited to hear how those go. But I think similar to, based off when Brighton Park came to visit us last year, I got the opportunity to also walk into different classrooms and see how the talking circles went. And all teachers do and facilitate the talking circles differently. So I think a next step for us, one is just to see how different teachers and share at grade level meetings how they do that. Some use green and red index cards, some do Nearpods, things like that. So I think sharing more ideas in that realm, but also, and this is an idea from Brighton Park, is creating a choice board. I think that's the next step that we want to do. We have these strategies for meaningful work, but I think creating an actual like system like Brighton Park does with their choice board is a great idea and a good next step for us to follow.
Awesome. Thank you for both of those. We did get one more question in chat, which I think is an interesting one. It was asked, how has the data suggested that there are things that teachers or admin might not do? That is, are there administrative initiatives or common teacher moves that either make minimal or no impact, or perhaps even run counter to goals? And I think this question is interesting because I think what we have seen at some schools and not necessarily at yours is that sometimes some of the data will go up for one subgroup that's working on something and down for another. So we had a group or a school that was working on like meaningful work specifically for boys, and they saw some of their girls' data stagnate or kind of just or even go down a little bit. And so we do have conversations with schools about how do we think about what is impacting that change. How do we then make different changes, right, to make sure that we are getting to the outcomes that we want? I'm not sure that totally answers your question, Dustin, but does anybody else have anything that they want to add to that, of just like things that you may have seen that you're like, oh, we actually stopped doing that because of student experience data?
So not that we actually stopped it, but we kind of just changed our method. When we saw that meaningful work by just connecting it to the learning target, when we saw that in February, it went down, we knew that we had to be a little more concrete and specific, but not only the teachers, but the students as well. So that's when we started to implement the choice board, so that way students can make those connections themselves instead of just the teachers making the connection for them. So there are sometimes where it's like, oh, we've been doing this, but what can we do now? So I think just coming together as a school and coming up with ideas of what we can implement and how we can move forward with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, because I think one thing that you saw with the active monitoring was that it was hard for teachers at first, and it took a little bit of time for people to kind of get into it. And so you put in some quicker strategies to kind of get to that next step. So thank you for that. All right, well, we are almost out of time here. I do want to extend a huge thank you to both Ceci and Rika for taking time out of their school days to share their practices at both Brighton Park and Columbia Explorers. Thank you to all of you for your thoughtful questions and for joining us today. We are super excited to move into a breakout session to reflect on this together. There will be a link put into chat in a second, and we will go into that space, and we'll be starting at 3 with those breakout sessions. So please join us. For those of you that signed up early, you do have a calendar invite. For those of you that don't, Ashley just put into chat the Zoom link. So we'd love to have you jump from this webinar link to a more traditional breakout session link where we will be together. So thank you again to Ceci and Rika. And again, thank you to all of you.